So again, welcome. Today, our session is Mastering the Assessment Editor. So looking at kind of a deep dive into some maybe slightly more advanced functions outside of just the very basics of using the editor. We'll do some keyboard shortcuts. We'll talk about views and little tools here and there that we can make use of. All right, so I've got a trial here. It's just one of our example trials in our tutorial folder, the ST example number 1, fairly basic one, but that has some assessment columns in here that we can play around with and take a look at. So I'm in the assessment editor, and just to start with, I'm going to go over to a first empty column and just do some data entry shortcuts. So I've got all of these assessments already defined and filled in. Maybe I'll just real quickly pick some sort of rating type. It doesn't even matter what it is, and a unit. We'll come back and talk about. I don't think I want that one. I'll pick something simple like a doesn't have any limitations on it. We'll come back to the filling in of the assessment header later, but first just kind of talking through some data entry shortcuts if you are typing your data directly into ARM. Of course, we have some data collection tools that may be better suited to be actually in the field, but if you did take notes on paper and pencil, having somebody fill them in, there's some shortcuts here in ARM to make use of. So the first one would be some of the common values, 0s and 100s, at least in certain types of assessments, can be somewhat common. If you're looking at the presence of something, but maybe the pest hasn't really started coming yet, pretty early on in the season, you might have a lot of 0s, or if it's a % of damage or something where things haven't really started happening, you might end up with a bunch of 100s. So there's a few shortcuts for those values. So for 0, if you type in the Z character, so I'm just on my keyboard, I just typed the button Z, short for 0, and you can see it put in a 0 for that value I typed in, and it also pressed enter for me. So literally I'm only pressing one key. I press Z, and it very quickly gives me that 0 and also moves to the next plot all in one key press. So these shortcuts here go pretty quick. So again, the Z will give you the 0 key. You can also use the letter O, which looks a lot like a 0. And of course, since we are putting in numbers here, it enters that 0 character. So same thing, that's the O that I am pressing on my keyboard. That also gives me a 0 and moves to the next plot. For the 100, you can do the H for 100. You can see there, just like before, just a single key press, and it's kind of doing 2 actions for me. You can also do a C, the letter C, short for centi, for the 100 prefix there, gives you 100 as well. And also the letter I, which looks like a 1, I think is what we are going for there. So just pressing the I button as well gives you that shortcut. Here, let me type in some other value here and press enter. You can copy the value. So if you have the same number kind of over and over again, much like we did in the treatments editor, if you've seen this trick before in the treatments, using the single quote key. So for me, it's right next to my enter key, not the double quote, but just the single quote or the apostrophe. And as I press that, just like before we saw, I'm only pressing the key once, and basically I get a free enter where it moves to the next plot as well. So it's copying whatever number is right above it, and gives me, we got done with our column here. So it gives me whatever number is directly above that. So if I were to kind of do that again here in this next column, and in this case, it's a different number, using that single quote just repeats whatever was last. So that's a way to kind of copy above, if you will, for a value that is repeating as you go. One more shortcut, I guess not really a keyboard shortcut, but a way to real quickly fill in maybe an entire column. You know, we showed the zeros and the hundreds, those are pretty fast, just to push that button. But of course, depending on how many plots you have, it still might be a little redundant. So you could, if you had an assessment that's all kind of one value, nothing's there or whatever it is, maybe it's all 50%, I don't know. You can, if you copy a value, let me go to the top here, just copy this 0, you can paste in a whole block. So if I were to select a bunch of plots, then when I paste, in this case, I had some values already here. So of course, ARM wants to warn me whether I really want to do that. And so it'll paste that one value that I copied across all of the cells that I had selected. So let's say I have a column that's totally 100. I could copy that, and a shortcut to select every row in that entire table is just to click on this heading that has the column number, and that grabs everything. So then if I paste, either with Control-V or the paste, there it fills in that entire column for me of that one value. So an even faster way to get a bunch of values in if, like we said, early on the season, you have some assessments like that where it's just real quick, everything was the same, nothing has happened yet, basically. So those are some shortcuts if you're directly entering data into the ARM file. I guess kind of on that same topic, as you are entering data, there's a couple of ways to kind of format the editor and get it set up to match however you took the data. So looking over here on the left, and maybe we should have started by just kind of defining what's on this editor here, but over to the left is our plot description, or your experimental unit description. It doesn't always necessarily have to be a field research that you're working on. And so by default, when I come in here, we've got our plots, and we can decide how we want to sort them. And in this case, they're sorted by plot order. You see that small arrow next to the word plot, that means it's sorted by plot number. Threw me off here for a moment because I have really strange numbering. They're not all in a row, but if I want to look at the trial map, there's a shortcut button here, or I could use the navigation bar, but this will bring up my trial map to look at. And yeah, I picked kind of an odd, looks like I picked kind of a strange tutorial file because it's got very strange numbering. I'm just going to renumber plots kind of as we go here to make it make more sense. Because to be honest, it's a little hard to follow. So I'm not sure if there were spaces in the field or why they had that numbering system, but doing the renumber plots here now changes, not necessarily randomization, which, well, this isn't very random to start with, but just changing the numbering system here, which I think will make a lot more sense for us now. So let me hit accept current to make that change there. Hopefully that's a lot easier to follow. So our plots are ordered just strictly in the order that they would be numerically, which doesn't always help for how we may enter in data. So we have a assessment order and a harvest order that can change the order of these plots. So that way, when we are entering our data, the plots will just be in the order in which we actually took notes. So here I clicked on our assessment order, and now you can see we go 101 down to 104, and then we go up to 204 and work our way back down. Or if we look at that visually, you can see that from the movement arrows section here on the trial map. So if I select the assessment order, it will draw arrows on the map to illustrate that order that we may go through the field when we're taking our notes. And so right now I have it set to serpentine within blocks. So as we saw, 101 down to 104, and then we just hop over to the next rep and work our way back. Instead of course, walking all the way down to 201, just because that would be the next plot to start taking notes, a lot more efficient use of our time by maybe going serpentine. Or maybe I go the opposite direction. There's quite a few different options here, depending on your orientation. There's a reverse serpentine, so this would start with 104, or I can go across blocks to go the other direction. So there's a great many different orders, and just by choosing the order that you have here, maybe we'll stick with this one since it's very clearly different. Then when we sort by that assessment order, now these plots are in the order, so it'll be easy for us to fill in the data. We'll be able to type in just the same direction that we took our notes on. We'll be able to do the same thing because we've got those plots sorted the way we want. So just one more time here, that's on that trial map. It's the movement arrows, and there's actually two different orders. So it's the exact same idea, but just a way to save two different configurations. One, kind of the assumption of and maybe an individual as you're out making an assessment might move through the field a little differently than the harvest order, where maybe there's equipment, maybe it's a combine or something that's moving through the field naturally, might be a totally different method perhaps, so the order might be different. So there's exact same list of options, it's just a matter of now you have two different orders that you can sort by. So that's found on the trial map to set the order for data entry. One more thing to look at, since we've got the trial map open, is just to point out that this plot description here really is the trial map. It's how that trial map is defined. So the block and the column are really basically an XY coordinate for each plot, and that drives how ARM draws the trial map. So the block is essentially your Y coordinate of which block, which horizontal row are we in the field, and then the column, of course, would be the X coordinate as you go vertically. Which vertical slot would it be in? So that's part of some of the copy and pasting you can do. We've done in previous sessions where you can change the entire randomization just by pasting in columns titled this way, and ARM can adjust the entire map to fit. So there is a way, these are all read only. You'll notice they're all in italics. If I try to type in here, it's locked to make sure that you're entering data. You won't accidentally start putting your data in one of these columns and really break your map. So by default, those are locked down, so you can't just accidentally change them, even though they are just cells in this table. If for some reason you did want to manually adjust the map and one of these values here in these columns, there's this lock, this button right here. And so if you click that, you'll notice now they're no longer italics, they are all editable. So you have to be careful with that, of course, because it's real easy to mess up the map, or even your design. If you're changing like replicate numbers, you got to make sure to switch things. But that is one method for kind of adjusting the map. Not very visual, maybe a little error prone, but is an option if really needed. But by default, it's all locked down, so you can't accidentally change anything. Then the last little button in this panel is a plus sign, and it kind of expands this experimental unit description to give us a few more columns of information. So these are all kind of additional properties for this particular plot. So there's an option to put in a barcode or RFID, GPS coordinates, so latitude and longitude. Maybe if this is an orchard study, or plot is actually just a single tree or something like that, and you need, you want coordinates for that very specific tree or plant or whatever it might be that you're studying. We can have latitude and longitude again of that plot, that experimental unit, which is just a little different potentially from the assessment. When you have an assessment value here, over on the properties panel, there is a spot for GPS. So that target is this 83, this assessment for plot 101. That's that GPS coordinate. Whereas the latitude and longitude here is really for that plot overall, for maybe all of the assessments, essentially. So two different spots, maybe slightly different. Maybe it always ends up being the same coordinate, but two slightly different ways to put in the GPS. And then finally, there's the alternative plot ID. So sometimes the numbering system that ARM has, there's a variety of different choices in the layout settings, but sometimes maybe we don't have an option that quite matches your numbering system. That's really where the alternative plot ID comes in, and it basically becomes a mask over that plot ID that we have. And you can even have characters, so you can type in whatever alternative identifier you would want for your plot. And you'll see once you type in that code, it basically just goes over the top of that existing plot number that we had. So just put in a few different ones like this. It could be just maybe it's just letters. I mean, it doesn't really matter what it is. What you'll see then that overrides what was in the plot. ARM still knows that this was originally plot 203 or something, or whichever one it was. It was 302. Now it's also known as F. So it knows both of those. That 302 is still kind of in memory if you did paste something in or something like that. But this is a good way for ARM to know what that plot is, even if it's not using its numbering system. So that's the alternative plot ID. And again, that's usually hidden by default. We had to use that plus button here in order to see that. But even if we hide it later to kind of save screen space, you'll see that that alternative IDs are still present. All right, I'll just clear those out for now so we're not confused later. All right, so that's really the data portion, kind of the data entry functions. I guess we showed sorting by the different movements here. You can also sort these plots kind of like in Excel, where you just click the heading. You can do that here. So if you wanted to sort by treatment number, that can be kind of useful for just looking over your data, so you can see the group of treatment 2, how did it perform, things like that. You can technically sort by any of these columns. both ascending, and then if you click it again, it'll go descending. I think by default, when you come into ARM, it sorts by plot ascending. That'd be another way to kind of change the sort. And it's all possible also in the tools sort by menu. So all those different options there that we were doing, same list here in this sort by. So there's also where you can do your like assessment order or whatever. All right. So the next topic, I kind of breezed over this when we started to enter data, but the top half of the editor is what we call the assessment header. It's really the description of what the assessment was, what was performed. And so I've got a few that are filled in nicely. Of course, if I was really doing data, I should have filled this in much nicer than I did. But maybe we'll just talk through real quickly how to fill this in or how to read the header if you weren't the person to fill it in. And the first few rows are the pest and the crop information, identifying kind of what specifically we were looking at. In this study, it was on corn throughout the study, so that's really the only option we had. But we are looking at different weeds, and in this case, we're looking at how well they were controlled. So a percent of control is this particular assessment. So you want to fill in in this case, what specific weed are we rating that we were looking at? So looking at the common lamb's quarter. Then as we move down, we've of course got the rating date to document when this occurred. And really the main description of what the assessment is, if you weren't going to fill anything else out, these three would be what you'd want to fill in. And it really is the encapsulating the full description of what was done. So really the rating type is the action that occurred. What did I do for this assessment? And in this case here, we were control is what we were rating. How well did we eliminate the particular pest that we are looking at? Then the part rated would be, what did I perform this action on? Or what are we? What's the target? What are we looking at specifically in this assessment? And in this case, it's just the overall plant. We're just looking at the total amount of plants that are or are not there. And the C or P is just saying, okay, are you talking about the pest for P, or are you talking about C, the crop? So which of the two, kind of to call back to up here, which one are you talking about? In this case, we're counting plants, but are we considering how many weeds, or are we considering the stand count of how many corn plants are there? So we want to specify the part you're looking at, and also, are you talking about the pest? Are we talking about the crop that we're specifically looking at? And then finally, the rating unit, that is, what was recorded. So the values that you're going to put down below in each plot, what is the unit of measure for that? So those are kind of the bare minimum to fill in really the core of what occurred. Depending on the particular assessment, and if you're taking different samples, then the sample size might be important as well. We won't dive too far into that, but there's kind of a whole system you can do to be really specific if you have kind of a more complicated sampling structure. There's a few different fields you can use to really specifically define what was sampled or how it was sampled. Then after that, number of subsamples, of course, is important. If you are taking more than one value, per plot. Otherwise, by the default is 1 when there's just one value to record. And then after that, it's a bunch of details to record at that time of assessment. So different information about the crop, the stage of the crop when the assessment took place, the density of it. There's a few different ones available that are just hidden at the moment. Same thing with the pest. What stage was the pest at, the density, things like that. And then different timing and intervals kind of relative to different parts of the study, like the treatment application. How long has it been since the last treatment application to this interval? How long has it been since the planting date, days after emergence, things like that are all calculated. So that's the assessment header. We can control what all we see here. So as I said, there are a few, there's even more rows than what we saw here visible. If I look over to the properties panel at the right, there's actually a whole list of hidden fields. So much like other sections of ARM, we can turn off certain pieces of information that we don't want to see or that we know we won't fill out. And so you can see there's a good large number of options that we didn't even see at the moment. And of course, we can always turn them on if we want to. So if I turn on description, that'll just make that row visible again in this table. So I can manually bring in whatever I might also want to see. Or if I don't want to see it, so I know I don't need the crop variety to fill in, you can always right-click on the row and hide current field. And that'll make that one go away. Specific to the assessment editor, you can, if you double-click on the row header, I guess is what this would be. So if I double-click on description here, that'll also hide that field. It's not a lot of spots in ARM will actually do that, but this is one case where maybe I want to hide the collection basis. Just double clicking on that heading over on the left will make that row disappear. Again, you can always find it again back in the hidden fields if you want. And you can even do that with something that has information in. So I can hide the stage scale if I don't need to see that, even if it has information. And there's a great question here as we deal with what we call the view to see what we want to see here on the editor. This does also extend to reporting as well. So on a lot of the reports, I'll just go real quick to do a print reports. Let's just do the AOV means table, for example. On the general summary, you can tell ARM, I want on my report to show the header rows exactly as I see on the editor. So current view will set that. So exactly what I just picked on the screen, I want that exact list on my report. And so using that current view then will match up. So you get things to look just the way you want on the screen. You can make that same selection basically in the report by using that current view. And that fits for data header rows. That also goes for the assessment columns. A lot of the things we'll show here as we're manipulating our view of what we see on the screen. They all can be used within the report as well. So really good question. And we'll also show in a little bit how you can save this to a separate file as well. And that matches up nicely for the report as well. So I can, as I've configured what I see on the screen, not only is it for this point in time, but I can actually then save those choices into a file so that way it's really easy to recover that exact list or send it to a colleague. If I want everyone in my group, hey, this is the list, this is the best list for our reports. You can save that view. Everyone can use that view file, and we'll kind of play around with those in a little bit. There's also a question here about hiding headers. And then when you're exporting a rating shell, will it choose all of them? And I'll admit I don't use rating shells enough to just answer that off of the top of my head. But if we were pushing out a rating shell, I think it would be separate. I think if we say all, so over here, I think we're talking about the assessment data headers, there's an option for all. So that will bring all of them, totally regardless of what we have hidden or not. So if you want to use the choices you made on the screen, again, just like we saw in the report, you would use current view. So this would then make the selection for you of only rows that you see on your screen will be what gets sent with that rating shell if you choose current view. But if you choose all, that will be all the rows, whether or not you've ever hidden them or not. That'll bring them all. Some good questions there. Okay, so we've kind of shown how you can manually manipulate those. There's also some views here right underneath the hidden fields. And I'm just going to expand this list. There's a few default choices that we've saved, but the ones on the top I really like. They're not necessarily a view file, but they're more about kind of automating what gets seen here based specifically on what we're looking at. So of course, there's the option for all fields. So that will basically turn on every single row. So now I see literally everything I can possibly enter, and you can see just how long of a list that creates. But that is all fields. Then there's also an option to hide empty fields. So now that, based on just what's entered here, it hides any row that didn't have any information in it across all the assessments I may have. So you can see like sample size. Well, it's empty for a lot of these assessments, but I assume at least one of these, yep, column number 13 had a sample size filled in. So we did not hide that row because at least one of the columns had information in it. So now, since I first clicked all fields, so we saw everything, and then hide empty fields, this kind of really condenses down to just the information that has been entered. The other option here, hidden fields with information. Let me just hide some of these rows here first before we do that, because it's going to show us any rows that have been hidden but have some information in them. So if you open up a study and you just want to make sure that you're not going to overlook something that has been entered, but I just had that row hidden by chance, then hidden fields with information bring any of those back. So again, those are kind of the top list here. And then original, the very first one should bring us to the view we had kind of when we started the process. So that's those first few options in the views. And then the next ones are just defaults that we send out. For different examples, one of them is for the tablet data entry for TDCX. One is to demonstrate fields used with ARM Mobile. A couple of these are just kind of examples for something like fertilizer fields. Just to kind of give an example of maybe why you would want to save a file at all. And then the rest underneath that are views that I have created. So kind of like we mentioned with the reporting, you can save the selection you have if you open up the view options. And here on the view options, there's a table of all of the different rows. And really what we've been manipulating this whole time is this visible column. And we're just turning on and off which rows we want to see and which ones should not be seen. So we can save those selections to a file using this save view. So we can give it a name, like our example, maybe it's our our final reporting. These are the rows that I'm going to want to have on my final report. Let me put this into a file so that way every year I can load that up and use that when I'm doing my reporting, and I can always change my view throughout and get back to that exact list. And that'll just save it onto my computer into a file that's got a PDV file extension. So it's easy to share. If you want to go and find that file that you save and send it in an email to colleagues so they can have that same list or whatever, you can do that. And so those are kind of those last items in that list that we see there is my named ones. All right, so all of that kind of matches the other editors in ARM. So if you're in the site description, you can turn off fields, bring them back, save them to a file. Same thing with the treatments editor. But here in the assessment editor, we do have another kind of layer of things we can do to manipulate these columns. And that is found here in this column filter. So as we said, these are each of the different rows in the table that are possible. And one thing we can do to change what we're looking at here is using these other columns. So to start with match, that allows me to look at only specific columns based on the contents of one of these rows. So maybe if I click into pest name, I want to visualize and look at the assessments related to only one of the pests that I've looked at. So this little gold box, if you've used our study list, you'd be familiar with that. It's the filter button. And this gives me a list specific to this trial that we're looking at of the unique pest names that are in these assessments. So maybe I want to look only at the lamb's quarter assessments. So I can choose that one and click OK. Now when I click OK, my screen changes and I can only see the assessments based on that information, which at the moment is hidden. So let's use our hidden fields with information. And this is just warning me that there are 14 columns that we can't see right now. So don't have a panic attack of where'd my data go, but there's just some that aren't visible at the moment. But we can see only ones that have the common lamb's quarter entered. And now we can kind of compare just that one assessment to see what had happened. And the rest of those are just hidden. So you'll see column 1, column 5, and then we start with the next empty one. But over here on the right, there is in red a note that we're hiding 14 columns. So not that the data is gone, but instead that's just not visible to us at the moment. We can go back to our view options and change the matching if we want, or I could clear the selection we made. And you can do this for really any field. So if I wanted to look at my assessments and maybe rating type, I only wanted to look at these 3 that are all related to yield, for example. You can choose more than one. And you'll see now the view has changed based on those values. We only see columns 9 happen to be all in a row up to 13. So that's match. Maybe it's somewhat limited to view only what you want. If I clear the match, I can also sort. So instead of removing things from our view, maybe I just want to change the order of the columns. So how about we kind of similar looking at rating type. If I want to sort by rating type, so that way they're all similar ones are all put together, you can just put the number 1 for kind of the top level sort. So I first want to put the rating types all in this case will be in alphabetical order. Then, we saw we had quite a few control ratings. How do I want to order those that all have the same rating type? Maybe let's order those by pest. So I'll put a 2 in the pest code. So all of the same rating types, then I want to sort by pest code within that group. So now when I click OK, we'll see that we are seeing all of the columns. We haven't hidden any of them now, but we have them in a different order. So these goofy ones I had that are all empty ended up sorting out first. If we move to the right, then we can see the control type of control is first. So those are all grouped together. Then after that, we had moisture content, weight, yield. So you can see that it's in a totally different order based on, kind of alphabetizing the part rated. If I go back to the control, we'll see then within all of the control ratings, we've moved these around some, so that way the pests are close together. So I can see those two, and then the next, oops. It looks like we took 2 assessments for each of our weeds, and so then those are sorted within there. One more nice way to look at that sort is this sort as tabs underneath here. When I turn that on, then it's kind of like in Excel, it makes different tabs for the unique rating types, or whichever row you chose as your number 1 sort. So now at the bottom, I can look, excuse me, at just the control ratings. I can look at just the yield ratings. And so it's narrowing down kind of like we did the match, but instead we get all of the options. It's really easy to toggle between them. So you can only see those particular ones. So this is really great, hopefully for data review, but even just if you're working in a trial that has a lot of assessments, this can be a great way to narrow down and limit how much scrolling you're having to do by just toggling on whatever row you care about. So this is all tied into that sort, and whatever matters the most is how you can sort that by. So any other rows can work as well. So maybe I want the rating date. I just want to see what we performed at each date. Maybe that's my top sort, and I don't even need a second one. Now I can see the assessments done on July 3rd compared to the assessments on July 10 compared to October. So any of the rows work. And one shortcut, instead of going to those view options again and again to tweak this sorting, there's also this visible columns button. And just on the same screen pops up that very same control that we've been working with, but it's a little quicker than to make an adjustment. And maybe I'll turn off the sort as tabs or something. And then you just hit apply, and it'll adjust the view. So same process, but just saves a little bit from having that whole screen come up. A couple more functions here for us. There's the data origin. So if you want to look at only calculated columns or only columns that are not the calculated ones, you can change that data origin. And maybe let's get rid of our sort so we can kind of tell what is not there. So I think we had some yield ones there. So 10 to 13. So we've hidden 2 columns that were calculated columns. Or we could do the opposite and only look at calculated columns. And there now we only see 11 and 12. So that's the data origin. Both, of course, kind of the default to see everything. Entry status, this is a good way to see only assessments that haven't been performed yet. So if I say empty, it'll only show assessments that have header information but haven't filled in data yet. In this case, I don't have any, so we're just hiding all of those that have data, and we see the first empty column. And we can put that back by default as well. So just some ways to focus in on what you want to look at without just kind of scrolling and having to take mental stock of what all you have and sliding things around, and it's easy to lose track even just with a few columns. This trial here with 15 columns is really not terribly large, and it's challenging enough to keep things straight. So use these view options to be able to focus in when you're reviewing data or when you're entering data. Let's toss out things I don't need to look at and pare down my screen to the only things I care about. One more option on the view options I want to point out. There's quite a few of these here, much like most of the ARM options. There's not a whole lot that I think people use a lot of. If there is some particular action you're hoping ARM would do or stop doing, you could kind of scan through these options, but I didn't find any that are particularly compelling to turn on or off. Just the defaults usually are what to use, except for over here, the view subsamples. Sometimes this is handy. More oftentimes it's a pain that people don't realize what happened. But when you have subsample data, let's real quick make a column. Let's just change this one to like a 3. So we have some numbers in here that have subsamples. So we've got more than one value for each plot. Then in the view options, you can control how those subsamples are viewed. The default is by column, which is kind of nice. When you're clicked into an assessment that has multiple subsamples, then you see all of them in the row. But if I click into a column that only has one subsample, then I only see one. And visually, I only just happen to see the first plot in this column. But if you click in to investigate, then you see all the values. The other options, though, you could say all. And so if I do that, then no matter where I'm clicked into, the editor will have all of the maximum rows. So even if I'm way over here where there's only assessments that have one value, no matter where I'm clicking, I'll have all of the subsamples possible visible. Usually makes it kind of hard to view, so I don't think it gets used too often. And then the last one is viewing subsamples, just the plot mean. So now there's always only one row. Even in that example we had here with the 3 subsamples, it shows us the mean of those subsamples, even if I click into it. And you'll notice I tried to start typing. You can't edit that value because, of course, this 12 here isn't a real 12. It's the mean of the different values. So it's warning me, hey, you can't edit that data because it's not actually a 12. So that's the changing of the view subsamples. Usually you want by column in most cases. So those view options, I think, are the kind of the most powerful tool that kind of goes unnoticed. The matching and the sorting, And all of those selections all tie into that view file. So if you do configure, you like a certain sorting or whatever, make that selection and then do that save view. And all of those configurations, those selections get bundled into that same view file. All right, couple of quick hitters before we totally run out of time. Have just a couple of study rules I wanted to point out kind of related to assessment data. And they actually were in our top 5 study rules from our last set when we were talking about protocols. This first one is consistent entries across rating timing. Oops, I thought I could pause that video. I cannot. So turning this one on is a great way to autofill some information. So here it starts. If you use the rating timing, that says all 4 of those columns are really the same assessment time. So when you fill in something like, in this case, it's the rating date, I need to be consistent across rating timing. When you fill it in for one column, it fills it in for all of the columns that have that same rating timing value. So here, as I choose a date, it's letting me know it's going to fill it in. I think the very first time you do it, it won't even ask. It just fills it in. And just I had switched back and forth. Once you start to change the value, then ARM will give you that warning that, hey, it's going to change all of these. So that's a good way from a data entry point. It's a good time saver. They'll just fill in for you all the rows that logically should be the same in that same rating timing. You could do the same thing for, the crop stage information, assuming they're all the same or whatever row you may want, you choose in your rule itself. And so that's consistent across rating timing. You can also do the same thing with the study rule, consistent entries across SE name. So same thing if you're using an SEs and it's got the same SE name in the editor, it'll do this same thing. The other study rule, which was our number one best study rule, at least in my opinion, especially for the assessment editor, is the limit validation list, which now that we have an interface, a little bit longer name, but actually explains what it's going to do. It limits the crop and pest lists within the assessment editor to only the ones you see that you have selected in your site description. So if I switch back to ARM, right now, when I need to fill in my pest, I have to choose my weed and I see the entire list. I mean, my best case is if I've made favorites list, I can see my favorites list, but even that might be much longer to see. So I have to go and filter every time to find the one I'm using. And that can also be a little error prone if I'm not picking the right one. Instead, if I'm add that study rule, and it's in the assessment data to limit crop and pest options. Now with that on, now when I'm filling in a column, I have a pest ID code now. When I click on that, I don't have to choose from the full list. I only see the pests that are filled in my site description for this specific trial. So it's a lot easier to get the one I want. If you, of course, encounter a weed that maybe you didn't anticipate, just clicking the new will bring you to, in this case, the pest description and add a new pest. So that way you can fill it in. And then it'll be available in the list when you're doing your data. So I think it's a time saver for filling it in. The sponsor is going to be happy, from a data consistency standpoint. It's going to be really great to know that the pests are all entered consistently, and we didn't accidentally pick the wrong code or something like that. So that one's really powerful. And I got 1 more minute left. Looking at the subsamples, we do have a small subsample editor. And that you can bring up by pressing the F2 button on your keyboard. So that kind of that function F2. In a column, of course, that has subsample values, it brings up a separate little dialog that has the values. Or, if I didn't have anything filled in yet, I was about to take some data, then that F2 has just the list of subsamples for this one plot. And so that can be nice to fill in. In this case, with only 3 subsample values, I don't know how much it gains. I actually kind of have to press enter twice to get out of that plot. But if you have a case where you're taking 25 subsamples or 50 subsamples, this is really long list, it gets hard to manage on the screen. And so this F2 subsample editor can be nice to really box in only the values for this plot that I am entering right now pops up. And you can also use it with that option here where we did the view options and view subsamples by plot mean, I should say. Then on the screen, you'll only ever have that one row, but when you're ready to take data, F2, now you can fill in the values. So that's one way to make use of that. All right, well, we're out of time. Thanks for the good questions earlier on. If you have any other questions, feel free to let us know. Thank you for your time today. As we mentioned, don't have one next week, but hopefully maybe we'll see again in the fall or in September, and we'll send out the link and also the feedback form if you would like to let us know how we're doing. So thanks everybody.